Good morning. I'm delighted this morning to be joined by Ben Rhodes, an award-winning marketing and business leader who has a wealth of experience in helping brands grow and transform. So Ben is currently the brand director of Phoenix Group, which is the UK's largest long-term savings and retirement business, and has previously held very senior roles with GSK and Royal Mail. And probably the thing to really celebrate, Ben, is congratulations, because you were awarded the top 100 most effective marketeer by Marketing Week for the third year, apparently in 2019 and 2022 as well. So an amazing achievement, and congratulations, and thank you for joining this morning.
Oh, thanks, Susie. That's lovely to be here, and I can't wait to have a good chat.
Excellent. Well, we've got some questions prepared, so let's kind of launch in, because I know everyone will be curious to kind of understand about how you got where you are today. And I think the first one, which is probably kind of sets us on the right track, is what first led you into a career in marketing?
Oh, it's a really great question, because I mean, my career has really been in two halves. The first part of it was in advertising, and the second part has been like in-house in marketing. And when I left university back in the dim and distant past in the mid-90s, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was a classic kind of art student. My parents hadn't been to university. They ran their own little small business. And they were really no help at all, to be honest with you, in terms of careers. I knew I didn't want to work in the kind of small company, family business. I originally wanted to go into publishing, but kind of loaded with student debt and all the rest of it, I couldn't make that work. And I literally ended up doing some sort of free work, actually, for a local agency in Oxfordshire where I was living, where they just said, I bumped into this couple who ran the business, and they said, look, come in next week and do some proofreading and some copywriting. We need a bit of hand in our studio. Come and see what advertising's like. So I did, and then and then my career kind of grew from there, from kind of being provincial to kind of getting into London. And then once I got into London agencies, I specialised in financial services. Because I hadn't come through a kind of grad route or anything, and I figured that all large agencies would have a financial services client. And I ended up, after about, I don't know, maybe 7 years at McCann Erickson, where I spent about 2 years there running JP Morgan across Europe, and then diversifying onto lots of other pieces of business. But that was the first part of my career. But then after sort of 10 years in the ad industry, I kind of looked at the people above me. I thought, I when I grow up, I don't want to look like them. I don't want to be like them particularly. I mean, they're great people, and they've all gone on to have absolutely glittering careers, certainly within McCann Erickson. But I just didn't think that was quite right for me. I also had a young family, and the hours were fairly brutal. I was working on a lot of international business, a lot of European business, and so the day would start at 5 o'clock in the afternoon for my clients in San Francisco. So it was quite tough. But also, and I think many advertisers probably have the same thing, is that I was working on this broad breadth of clients in different sectors, which was great. But I felt that I could do a better job. And I know that sounds terribly arrogant, and actually, to a degree, it was probably a little bit overconfident. But having spent 10 years kind of honing the craft of kind of building communications and building great brand campaigns and running amazing work, I found that a lot of the clients I was dealing with were absolutely terrified of kind of being of running brilliant work and being really bold. And I just thought at the time, goodness, I think I can do this better. And an opportunity arose, and I joined MasterCard in-house, which was a wonderful kind of place for me to kind of begin my career, because it was very advertising focused. But a really professional marketing organization. They sort of took me under their wing and taught me all the other P's of the marketing mix, of what you need to do. And that's where I really kind of learned about the commercial side of marketing as opposed to just the creative side of things. And that was fascinating. And then, that I went from MasterCard then onto various different companies before I ended up at Phoenix Group.
What an interesting path. And to your point, sort of started by the kindness of that company in Oxford giving you a first giving you a first shot when you had no experience, and then the path kind of wiggled from there. Good for you.
Yeah, and you know, I mean that start. I was chatting to somebody at work about this recently, who's got a son who's just finished an arts degree and wants to get into media, doesn't really know where to start. And I actually, I mean, the first year or so of my career in agency side, I spent in the production side of things, in the creative department, in doing repro, doing retouching, doing design, a little bit of writing. I don't have the craft skills, which is why I stopped doing that. But it gave me a huge grounding in how you actually physically create communications, which I'll be honest with you is absolute gold dust. Has always been a bit of a bedrock for me, just actually understanding how the process works. Maybe that says something about me, that I kind of like to get right into stuff. But it was a lovely introduction, and then I realized I wanted to stay in the communications industry and the marketing industry. So I then moved into account management and kind of moved on from there. But no, it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Sounds like it was the perfect foundation, because you understood how it actually all came together. So thank you for sharing that. Moving on, so as a recipient of multiple Marketing Week awards, as we've now discovered, has there been either a particular campaign or a specific highlight that really stands out for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple, but I suppose the one that when I look back on my career, I think I'm really pleased I did that, was actually a piece of work at Royal Mail. And I was at Royal Mail for quite a long time in a variety of different roles. But I did a huge piece of customer segmentation about sort of 3 years in. We had a new chief customer officer who came in, and he and I sat down and went, this company do not understand value. They understand revenue and they understand cost, but they don't understand customer value. And Royal Mail is a huge company and this was in the B2B side, not the B2C side of the business. And so we did a massive piece of segmentation that effectively took all of the products, all of the customers, all of the revenue, all of the margins, and crunched it all up and revealed this enormous gaping hole where we were suddenly able to really transform how we sold and how we looked after our customers. Because what we found was that everything was geared towards the highest revenue customers, not the most profitable customers. Bear in mind, Royal Mail most businesses have a contract with Royal Mail in some way, shape, or form. So it's largely the whole of the UK. And so we were able to go, well, the most valuable customers, only 30% of them are actually sold to. So we've got all the other customers here that aren't sold to. So that was a brilliant solution for the sales director, who had to he could just change his entire sales coverage model and make sure that he was selling to the most valuable customers with the biggest opportunity to grow and the ones that were most at risk. We did the same on service. It then allowed me to kind of really step back and go, right, well, if that's what the sales team are doing, the role of marketing has to be in these other segments which we can't cover. So I put in place a huge CRM program from scratch. And you know, it absolutely, I mean, I quadrupled the revenue that marketing was generating over 4 years off the same budget, because we had really strong, firm foundations, and we genuinely knew where value sat and what was at risk and where there was headroom to grow. And we were able to really, just within our existing means, be able to kind of focus in on the right areas. It was a phenomenal project to work on. And I look back at that and kind of go, that really was commercially a really valuable piece of work to have done. So yeah, no, I look back at that with quite a bit of pride.
Quadrupling the sales, that's really quite something. We talk a lot on these Q&A sessions about leadership and managing teams, and you're clearly a really natural leader. And I was wondering, would you share with us, you know, how do you and your teams work together to achieve such impressive results? You know, that takes some special leadership there. So what's the trick?
Well, that's a really good question, and I think it's sort of I have quite an adaptive leadership style, because I think businesses go through cycles and marketing functions go through different cycles. So you can't have one way of doing it, and so it's quite important. So I'll give you an example. When I first joined Phoenix, there was no brand function at all. Never had one. So I had to kind of create one from scratch. And in that sense, the role for me in the first 18 months, I would say, was much more about direct leadership and direct control and really kind of centrally controlling things. But then once you bring in brilliant people who are, super, super talented, then the role of leadership is completely different. The role of leadership has been, over the last 18 months, has been to gradually, I didn't do it all in one go, but to sort of step back and just make sure there's the right culture in the team and that everyone's supported, but actually they can just get on and own things and do it themselves, because that's why I employed them, because they're better at it than I am. But different heads of kind of, are at different stages of their own personal development. So some you can just kind of push them out the nest and get them to fly. Others you need to give a little bit more support to. So I very much I'm quite thoughtful about how I do that. But I guess overall, the one thing I've learned in my career is that to be successful in marketing, you have to be creative. I'm not talking about advertising creative, but I mean genuinely imaginative, and take quite often quite bold leaps to be able to reach for something which is extraordinary, or better than the industry is currently doing. And you can only do that if you're in an environment where occasionally you can trip up and fall over and not feel that the world's going to land on your head. It's a really difficult thing to manage, I would say, as a leader, because I hate missing targets and I hate failing, but equally creating that culture, particularly from people above and in other parts of the organization, so that the operators and my team can actually just get on and do it and not worry too much, is probably, I guess, where my biggest role is, in kind of creating that environment and sustaining it. And
that's quite an art. I mean, you touched there about sort of the enabling a team to feel that they can be bold and brave, and you're there to catch them if they kind of get it wrong. And as a leader, how do you stay positive and resilient? Because it's not always easy. There will be challenges, there will be obstacles, many, I'm sure. But I'm always curious, kind of how, it's something you would have trained yourself to do. But how do you stay positive and resilient as the leader of the team?
Yeah, so that's it. I tend to be very clear on kind of where I want people to go, and then where I want what I want to achieve. So whether it's a 3-year plan or a 5-year. But I tend to, my outlook is what I start with the end in mind, but I know that the route to that end could be really quite different from how I intend it to be to begin with, and so I've trained myself to have to be incredibly patient. Especially when you're sort of building a function from scratch in an organization, as I am at the moment, that never had any kind of marketing or kind of brand thinking involved in anything. You have to kind of go with the organization, and I think but because I know where I'm going and I know what the kind of key waypoints are that I need to get to, there's always a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. Which I can, hopefully it's not a freight train coming towards me, but it's a bit of light that I can see that is kind of near term, that I know is a massively important step that we need to get to, so we can get to that final destination. And I guess it also helps that I am quite an optimistic person anyway, not ludicrously kind of positive. But I tend to be able to see the silver lining to the clouds that sometimes cross the horizon. But the other important thing is taking time out. I mean, I take a lot of time out, and I make a lot of time to think and reflect in my week. And I suppose, I'm being the leader of my function, I'm quite lucky that I can do that. But it's something I also urge all of my leaders in the team to do as well, which is to plan, is to kind of have, across the week, at least half a day whether that's done in one chunk or across, where people are sitting back and actually going, right, what is it that I'm trying to, what outcomes am I actually trying to achieve this week? And what am I going to prioritize and what am I going to deprioritize? So I spend a lot of time, it's a discipline to kind of do that. But I find that actually helps me recharge, because it means that nothing ever feels too far away. Because you can say, well, I want to get here, so this week I have to do this, and these are the 5 things that I've got to try and manage. So that's, I try and break it up into chunks, I guess.
I love that. That makes absolute sense. And I think having, to your point, it is a discipline. You know, I do the same. I have certain slots within the diary across the week that are literally kept clear for planning and strategy. And it's just that bit of headspace that you need to kind of think about where are we in terms of our targets. But sort of looking forward, talking of planning, it sort of leads us on rather nicely to you know, 2024, 2025, you know, kind of priorities for senior leaders. Do you have any thoughts? Do you see any trends coming through, or do you have any view as to kind of what those key priorities will be for you and your peers over these next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, we've come through an extraordinary period in the last few years, but actually since about 2008 we've been operating. There's a whole generation of marketers that have never operated in the growing economy, which I find terrifying. I mean, I'm lucky enough to remember what it was like when, you know, where you'd had GDP at 3 or 4% a year, and we've never had that. Well, not for the last 15 years, and I think coming out of you know, the pandemic and then cost of living crisis, and which is still, you know, going on and will do for the next couple of years, I think, I think there has never been a greater time for senior leaders to really move their organization on, albeit with a lot of constraints, which requires a lot of imagination about actually what can we do. For some organizations, what can I do? How can I do more with less? Some organizations, it would be, well, how can I try and grow a bit faster? How can I get a bit more market share than the peers that I'm competing with? And I think that requires really, and it often falls to the marketing leaders to think about how can we do things differently? How can we understand our customers better? To come up with the propositions and the services and reach them and engage them in ways that will help us kind of move ahead. And I think that's incredibly important. There's, you know, 1,000,001 tools in the marketeers toolkit. I know AI is a massive thing at the moment. I'm less sure on that. I think it'd be great at driving efficiency. I'm not entirely sure how good it's going to be at driving effectiveness. I've yet to see generative AI that really comes up with original ideas. But I think you know, there's an awful lot, I think, on a senior leader's plate in an organization, kind of in this trading environment, to think about. You know, balancing that effectiveness with efficiency is difficult, but also being that beacon of the, you know, the voice of the customer in the organization. There's very few that have that the kind of purity of it, the unbiased. You know, sales have always got a voice of the customer program that they run if you're in a B2B organization, but it's very much about kind of how to sell things now. It's not necessarily how to build a brand that's going to be sustainable in the future. It's about hitting targets. Customer service will always have a view on kind of like what's wrong with the product and what's wrong with the service, but that's not necessarily the holistic view of what a customer is and their expectation gap between what's available but what they really want to have. And I think so marketers have a brilliant perspective there, and they just, if only they can unlock that and then communicate it internally to drive change. And I think that's probably, I suppose, change making is, I guess, what I'm getting to is that's really what the senior marketing leader's role has to be in the organization, to kind of lift it up a little bit more.
Great answer. I'm going to finish on something that's I guess is potentially a bit more personal, because I'm always keen to understand kind of what motivates people. And, you know, are you willing to give us a bit of an insight into what drives you to succeed? Because you've had a phenomenally successful career, and I'm always quite nosy or curious as to see where that motivation and drive is from.
Yeah, it's changed a lot, actually. I suppose at its core is I like fixing things. I've always liked doing that, taking things to pieces and fixing them. I used to do it with guitars and amplifiers and all sorts of things. Loved Lego and Meccano when I was a kid. I've always liked doing that. I think, but as I've kind of matured as a marketeer and as a leader, it's less about me actually of how I get my motivation. It's much more about helping my team achieve brilliant success, and that has really only happened in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, and most certainly in the role that I'm in now, where I've sort of reached the point in my career where actually I derive the greatest amount of motivation and joy by kind of, spotting a talented person with some potential and then helping them on their journey, ideally within my function, certainly within, ideally within the company, but to help them to actually kind of truly deliver to their potential, and commercially, therefore, support the business and its endeavors. And I get much more joy out of that now than I do against my own kind of personal achievements of what I've actually done. And I think, but that's come with time. I mean, I think at the beginning of my career, it was probably more about winning awards and doing brilliant work that my mum could look at and go, oh yes, yeah, Ben did that. But I've kind of moved beyond that. I've kind of conquered that need, if that makes sense.
Very true. I think our drivers and motivations definitely change as we get older and develop through our career. But Ben, thank you. Some fabulous answers this morning. It's been an absolute joy to kind of listen to your achievements and how you got there and what drives and motivates you. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's been great to chat.